up to. Kind of our main kind of overall elevator pitch. Elevator pitch that we have lifetime service students and foster dialogue on campus, both to actually bring about change on and off campus through activism, information gathering campaigns, and awareness campaigns. What we did recently, Mike and Bryant, he's one of our board members. He ran a warming shelter in Oxford, the volunteer firefighter. Helped dozens of people find food and water when Winter Storm Fern. Kind of on the political front, me and Jacob traveled to Utah to help local college Republicans repeal Proposition 4. We actually recently found out that we had enough signatures for it will be on the ballot this November, so it's good for us. Mr. Thomas, right here, he joined the Brandon Herrera election campaign. Recently, the main competitor to Mr. Herrera, Tony Gonzalez, dropped out, which means Brandon Herrera will be the Republican nominee for District 23. Will be hosted recently. Chairman Brown of the Public Service Commissioner came and kicked us off in the spring semester. Talked about Winter Storm Fern, kind of what happened, how the recovery's going, that sort of thing. Prax Ben, Gerard Gibbard, Prax Ben, Gerard Gibbard, both big time influencers. Prax Ben, the local guy. Prax Ben is out of Texas. Gerard Gibbard is here in Mississippi. Found out recently, Prax Ben was actually born in Biloxi, so he's also a Mississippian for that. Without further ado, it's kind of the event all I'm waiting for. This is our second time after we scheduled this event. We just finally get it done. Weather worked out for us. No more winter storms or hurricanes or anything like that. So we're super happy to be able to present this to y'all. This is, of course, Miss Lindsey Beckham and Nancy Loome. They're going to be presented up here by Dr. Nathan Noakes, the Mississippi, or the, how do you say it? Center for Practical Ethics. Without further ado, I'll let it take a stand.
Howdy, everybody. Glad you're here. So like Lawson said, I'm Nathan Oakes. I'm the Director for Education and Student Programs at the Center for Practical Ethics here at Ole Miss. My office is in the basement. And you're here to listen to these two wise women talk about whether Mississippians should support school choice. So we've got Lindsey Beckham directly here next to me. Lindsey's a mother of 5 from Madison, Mississippi. She's the chair of the Madison County chapter of Moms for Liberty and the host of her own radio show, The Lindsey Beckham Show. Lindsey advocates for parental rights, medical freedom, and educational transparency. In this debate, she'll be presenting a perspective in favor of school choice legislation. And then over here on the left, we've got Miss Nancy Loome. Nancy Loome is a mother of 3 from Clinton, Mississippi. She's the co-founder and executive director of the Parents Campaign and has extensive experience in positions across higher education and civic affairs. Nancy advocates for transparency, accountability, and the general improvement of public schools. In this debate, she'll be presenting a perspective opposed to school choice legislation. Now, I do have an agenda, so let me share it with you. One of the primary aims of the Center for Practical Ethics is civil discourse. And so I just want to take this opportunity to say that sometimes debates are a little gladiatorial. They're kind of blood sport, which can be fun, but is not super productive and not a good use of time when the debate is about something so important, or at this time in our nation. So we're lucky in this case that we already share the same goals, which is benefiting children and their futures and the communities they grow up in. So we're just going to have a little debate about what we think is the best way to achieve that goal. So for everyone here, and for everyone listening online, if ever anyone seems like they're playing blood sport and not trying to advance our democratic deliberation, I just want you to penalize them internally, all right? And with that, I think we're ready to start debating. We're gonna have Ms. Nancy Loome go first in our opening arguments, and indeed in all the sections as we move forward until we get to the questioning period. So for our opening arguments, Nancy, you'll have 5 minutes to discuss why Mississippians should not support school choice. The floor is yours.
Thank you. So do I need to use the mic, or is it, you can hear me okay?
If you could use it just for a moment, you don't have to hold it super close, just a little bit, that'd be
Okay.
great. Yes, ma'am.
Okay. Well, thank you for having me this evening. So should Mississippians support school choice? Well, if what you mean by school choice is using state funding to fund schools that pick and choose their students, absolutely not. And the majority of Mississippians agree with that. And that's why thousands of them called their legislators and asked them to vote no on House Bill 2, the school choice bill that died earlier in the legislative session. And here's why. The truth is that with the school choice that the voucher lobby is promoting, it isn't parents who really get the choice. It is always the private schools that get the choice. And that's because school choice legislation isn't written to benefit parents, and it's not written to benefit students. School choice legislation is written to benefit private schools. Private schools pick and choose the students they want, and they reject any that they don't see as a good fit. And that just shouldn't happen on the state dime. Any school that is publicly funded with state dollars should be open to all children. And all schools that receive state funding should operate under the same set of rules, the same assessments, the same public accountability, the same physical audits, the very same rules. Parents have choices now. They can choose public schools, private schools, charter schools, home schools. The question isn't, should parents have choices? They do. The question is, what should we ask taxpayers to pay for? And our state tax dollars are not intended to fund individual choices. Our state funds are intended to fund services that provide for the public good. All of us benefit from strong public schools. People who don't have children, people whose children don't participate in the public education system, all of us benefit from strong public schools, because where we have thriving public schools, we have thriving communities. And where we have struggling public schools, we have struggling communities. There is no exception to that anywhere in Mississippi. And that's because public schools drive economic development. And that drives higher average income, it drives higher property values, it lowers crime rates, all things that contribute to a high quality of life for all of us. So all of us benefit from strong public schools. That simply isn't the case with private schools. And the city of Jackson is a great example of that. In Jackson, we have some of the strongest private schools anywhere in the state. But look what happened to that community when all those children left the public schools to go to those private schools. The community is struggling. And that harms everybody. It's because there's no real public benefit to private schools. And so they shouldn't be funded with state tax dollars. City leaders understand that. And that's why 9 different local boards voted to adopt resolutions opposing school choice, because they know that school choice will harm their public schools, and that harms their communities. The state shouldn't be in the business of harming our communities. Mississippi public schools have provided an excellent return on the taxpayers' investment. Our public school teachers have worked so hard over the last couple of decades to make up for the really significant deficit that was created all those years ago when we did have separate and unequal education systems, when we didn't educate all children the same way. And now, Mississippi's public schools are thriving. In the most recent round of national test scores, Mississippi's 4th graders ranked 9th in the nation in reading and 16th in math. And while Mississippi, without school choice, was soaring past all those other states in national education rankings, every single one of the states that is ranked a top 10 state for school choice by the Ed Choice organization, every single one of them over that decade went backward in student achievement on the very same assessment.
30 seconds.
So studies show that when students leave the public schools on vouchers to go to private schools, they suffer persistent learning loss. That is a bad deal for students. It is a bad deal for taxpayers. It's a bad deal for communities, and it's not an appropriate use of our taxpayers. Thank you.
All right, Lindsey, you will now have 5 minutes to present your opening argument, and your time starts now.
Thank you all for being here, and thank you for having me. I really do appreciate the opportunity. One thing my organization does is that we open every single meeting that we have with a prayer and what we call a Madison Minute, which is a quote from one of our founding fathers that means something to us. And so I would like to do that this evening. Heavenly Father, thank you so much for allowing us to be here. Please be with us as we debate this issue civilly and with respect. Be with everyone as they travel back to their homes tonight. We love you. We appreciate you so much for all that you do for us. Amen. Benjamin Franklin said, an investment in knowledge always pays the best interest. I have several different jobs. I host my own radio show. I work part-time for a law firm. And I also work part-time for Moms for Liberty, where I interview people across the country, women across the country who are wanting to be more involved because they realize their parental rights are at stake here. We launched shortly after COVID, and we are dedicated to fighting for the survival of America by unifying, educating, and empowering parents to defend their parental rights at all levels of government. Our parental rights don't stop at the classroom door, and we do not co-parent with the government. And you know what? The Supreme Court agrees with us. In the 100-year-old Supreme Court case, Pierce versus the Society of Sisters, it was said that the child is not a mere creature of the state, and it is the fundamental right of the parent to direct the upbringing of their children as they see fit. And that means in education. So many parents were concerned about this that my organization grew so quickly. We now have over 300 chapters, over 150,000 members. And we were in 48 states, but as of last week, we have hit all 50 states. Utah and Vermont were holding out on us, but we've got them now. So we are in all 50 states across the country. Now, my most important job is a mom. And I have 5 very special, amazing, yet very different and unique children. They all have different qualities, they all learn differently, and they all have different needs. They don't all learn the same. I believe that we need to be supporting students, not systems, not bureaucracies. Money should follow the child and to where they're best educated. And nobody knows a child the way that their parents do, or wants the best for them the way that their parents do. Now, to give you a little background on my story, back in 2016, I very unexpectedly lost my husband. I was pregnant with twins at the time. My son was born with a congenital heart defect. He had open heart surgery at 5 months old. And then after being vaccine injured, he received an autism diagnosis. So he is a special needs child. He needs a different environment than his siblings do. And I know that school choice and education freedom right here in the state of Mississippi would afford him more opportunity and afford me, as their mother, the freedom to make those decisions. It shouldn't matter what your zip code is. It shouldn't matter what color you are. It shouldn't matter what your socioeconomic status is or how much money your parents make. What matters is that we educate our children to suit their needs in the best environment for them. And when we do that, that's when we see crime rates go down. That's when we see the economy grow. That's when we see more options. That's when we see students come out of school with a better head on their shoulders. They know what they're doing. They know what they want to do because they have been educated in the best way for them. So I absolutely believe that we desperately need school choice and education freedom right here in the state of Mississippi. Again, money should follow the child. Let's fund students and not systems.
All right, let's give one a hand. All right, so we're now going to have a couple of 2.5-minute response periods, and I just want to alert everyone that at the end of the debate period, there's going to be a time for audience questions. So go ahead and, get your wheels spinning, all right? So, starting the 2.5-minute rebuttal period. Nancy, if you'd like to respond to one of these comments, the floor is yours.
Thank you. Well, I would say that certainly every child deserves an excellent education, and that is the goal of the public education system. That is what they're held to. They're held to very, very high, rigorous standards. They have the responsibility to serve the needs of all students, not just the ones that they want to serve. Every single child. And I hear what Lindsey is saying about parents wanting to choose the best school for their child, and certainly that is the case. It also assumes that parents have all the information that they need to make that decision. I believe parents should have all the information that they need to determine what would be the very best education for their child. And that means providing them an apples-to-apples comparison of the quality of education that's being provided in their private schools versus the quality of education that's being provided in their public schools. Unfortunately, the voucher lobby is trying to keep that information from parents. They are adamantly opposed to private schools being held to any of the same standards, any of the same accountability, any of the same oversight that public schools have. And so that would be my argument, is that, again, it's really not about choices. It's about what taxpayers are going to pay for. And if we're going to ask taxpayers to fund these schools, they need to be publicly accountable, and we need to have an apples-to-apples comparison of how the quality of education provided in those schools compares to the quality of education provided in public schools, so that parents do have all the information that they need to be able to make that decision for their children. I've had lots of information and opportunities to go around the state and make presentations and speak to groups. I've asked, in every single one of those, I've asked people, I won't give you the test tonight, but I've asked them what standards a child needs to meet in 4th grade ELA to be considered proficient. Guess how many people have been able to tell me? Not a single one. So again, the idea that parents already have all the information that they need to know how and where their children should be educated, I think they need more.
Thank you. Thank you, Nancy. Sorry. Lindsay, you will now have likewise 2.5 minutes to respond. Your time starts now.
Nancy, I'm so glad that you brought up accountability. I believe schools need to be held accountable to parents. Parents, again, know their children better than anyone else, and they want the best outcomes for their children. Currently, we have 2/3 of our 4th graders who cannot read on grade level. We have 3/4 of our 8th graders who are not proficient in reading. Where is the accountability? Because when you look at the money that our legislature has poured into public education, K-12 here in the state of Mississippi, it has gone from 3-point-something million to 5.2 million in the last 10 years. And that's also with the number of students decreasing by 60,000 students. So when we look at accountability, let's look at some of the things that have happened in some of our public schools. There are some schools in Oklahoma that can't make payroll. There was in Wilkinson County, taken over by the state. There are 47 school districts that have had incomplete federal audits. 2 former superintendents recently pled guilty to embezzlement. There is a DeSoto County School Board member who defended a child predator and is still sitting on the school board. And then in Corinth, we had a teacher who made pornographic videos of his students using AI, was reported to the superintendent, who let him quietly resign, and he was then hired by Child Protective Services 2 weeks later. Accountability? Yes, it is needed. And our public schools obviously need to be held accountable for these actions. Now, private schools, on the other hand, they are accountable to parents. If you don't like what you're getting at a certain private school, You can leave it and you can go to a different private school. We want more choice, more options, more freedom. We don't need a cookie cutter world where we're creating our private schools to be just like our public schools, because that's not options. We need more options for our students, and accountability should be to the parents.
Thank you, Lindsay. Once again, we've got another 2.5-minute period, so Nancy, the floor is yours.
Well, I think Lindsay made my point for me. Because the reason that she can quote you proficiency rates in public schools is because those schools are accountable and the quality of education that they're providing is measured. But what she cannot tell you is the proficiency rate in private schools. Because we don't know. No one knows. Parents don't know. Teachers don't know. No one knows because there is no accountability. You know, we have seen, unfortunately, cases where parents have put their children in private schools, and then they get to this point where they think, I'm a little worried about this. I think I'm going to put them back in the public schools. And they find that they are so far behind. I've personally known quite a few cases where that was the case. And they didn't find that out earlier because there is no real accountability. Some parents think that if their children are, say, C and D students in a public school, and then they move them to a private school, I've seen this case too, move them to a private school, and all of a sudden their children are on the honor roll. And they think, wow, what a great school. My child can make the honor roll. It doesn't occur to them that it's because the expectations are so low, that what they're teaching is a grade level or more behind what is being taught in the public schools. Parents need that objective information, not just the feel-good stuff, but the objective data that tells them how their children are progressing. Mississippi has some of the highest academic standards in the country. Our standards are very, very highly rated on the national scale. And it is hard for children to meet those standards, particularly children who've grown up without a lot of resources, which all public schools welcome. And those are children that private schools are not trying to teach by and large. And so we don't have an apples to apples comparison, but we would know a lot more about that comparison if we had that public accountability for private schools.
All right, thank you, Nancy. Lindsay, you now have 2.5 minutes.
I stand firm on what I said about accountability. I think the accountability should be to the parents. But Nancy, there are a couple of words that you use a good bit, and I wanted to talk about that. When we talk about public dollars or tax dollars, really, those are our dollars. We pay taxes, and that is the money that is used to educate children in public schools. Why should parents not have the right to use the tax dollars that they pay to educate their child in the best way that they see fit? Another word you use a lot is voucher. Now, there is a difference between a voucher and an ESA, which is what House Bill 2, our Education Freedom Act, was going to give us here in the state of Mississippi. A voucher is something that the government sends to the school. An ESA, or a Magnolia Scholarship account, the way that our House put it, is a scholarship. It is giving the money directly to the parents to spend on their child to educate them in the best way for that particular child. It doesn't even have to go to the school. It doesn't have to go to a private school or a public school. The fact of the matter is, the parent gets to make that call because the parent knows the child better than anyone else ever could. So I think using the term voucher is quite misleading because that's not at all what the House was attempting to pass this year. They were in fact education, student, or savings accounts, scholarship accounts that would allow the parents to decide where that money is spent. Now, if you want to talk more about the accountability, again, I think our public schools are not accountable, given the rates that we see, even though we have made ginormous strides here. we still are seeing them not proficient. The majority of children are not proficient. And with more and more money each year, how much money is ever going to be enough money to get our kids where they need to be, to where they are proficient? Who is being held accountable? Doesn't seem like anyone is.
Thank you, Lindsay. We'll now hear closing arguments from each speaker before we get into some questions. So Nancy, you have 5 minutes to make your closing arguments. Your time starts now.
Thank you. Well, first, let me speak to what Lindsay said about allowing her tax dollars to follow her children, to be used for her children. So if you all have checked your tax receipts lately, you'll know that unless you are quite wealthy, you don't pay nearly enough in taxes to cover the cost of a voucher. We ran the numbers on that. And a household income would have to be $285,000 a year to cover the cost of one voucher. So these are not just for tax dollars. These are lots of people's tax dollars. And we all, it's exactly the way our system is designed to work. We all pay in a little so that we all get back a lot, so that every single child can have a quality education, whether or not we as individuals can afford to pay for that ourselves. That is the purpose of public funds and a public education system. Now, I'm guessing that our hosts tonight, the members of the Young Americans for Liberty, believe in a free market system, one that doesn't have anybody putting a thumb on the scale to benefit one entity more than another. Well, that is exactly the opposite of what you get with school choice. And let me tell you how that works. So with what is being proposed, we would have 2 state-funded but separate and unequal systems of schools. On the one hand, you have public schools. Now, state law prohibits public schools from charging tuition of the students who live within the school district. So they are only allowed to take in and spend what the government pays them. But they are held to all kinds of obligations and requirements. They must be open to every single child. They must serve the needs of children with special needs and provide those accommodations. They must provide transportation. They must meet state standards and be held accountable to those standards, very publicly so. All of these are requirements of the law. Now, what the voucher lobby is proposing is that private schools receive the very same base student cost that public schools get. But in addition to that, they're allowed to charge tuition as much as they want. So they have unlimited resources that they can spend. And at the same time, they are held to exactly 0 of the obligations and requirements that public schools are held to. They can pick and choose their students. They don't have to serve any student they don't want. They are not required to serve the needs of children with special needs. They are not required to provide transportation. Most of them do not. They don't provide free or reduced price meals, which public schools do, on and on and on. There are hundreds of pages of state laws that are obligations public schools are held to. How is that system in any way fair? It isn't. That isn't a competition. That's a rigged system. And it's not an appropriate use of our tax dollars. The ESAs that Lindsay mentioned earlier that give the money to parents in these other states, what parents are choosing to spend that on in Florida, in many cases, are big screen TVs and trips to Disney World and kayaks. And in Arizona, it was luxury ski resorts and diamond rings and lingerie. It opens us up to massive fraud. But the bigger problem is what is the impact on students, with very few exceptions. The very families that are able, have the means to choose and be chosen by private schools now are the same ones that will have the means to choose and be chosen by private schools if school choice legislation passes. It's what we've seen in every state that have adopted these programs. The majority of the vouchers are used by families whose children were already in private schools before the voucher legislation passed. Private schools are the ones that get to do the choosing, and those are the students that they choose.
Recently, a private school leader here in Mississippi summed it up really well. Here's what he said. This is a quote. If they pass a voucher bill, we'll just raise our tuition to keep out riffraff. That's a quote. Parents and families have always made and will continue to make education choices about their children. But our obligation as a state is to the public good, and that is in our public schools. It is where our public funds should be. It is where our legislators' priorities should be. It is where all of us have a stake. Thank you.
That's time. And now, Lindsay, you have 5 minutes to present your closing arguments.
Well, to speak to Florida and Arizona, we consistently see Florida at the very top when it comes to education. Now, having seen states around us already pass universal school choice, we've learned from them. We've learned what worked, we've learned what didn't, and our House, our Speaker Jason White, and Representative Rob Robertson and Representative Jansen Owen put together a bill that took all of that into consideration. There were guardrails in place. There was an accountability for how the parents must spend the money. And by the way, if you go and look at the Arizona Education.gov website, they talk about the misuse of funds, and that was in about 0.4% of what those parents were getting. So that was not something that was extremely common. And again, they learned from that. There are also lots of rumors that have floated around. Nancy, I believe I've heard you say this before, that school choice in Arizona was going to bankrupt the state. Now, according to state school chief Tom Horn, he says that that is absolutely a myth, and that universal school choice was never a threat. In fact, in their most recent fiscal year, which ended in 2024, they had a $4 million surplus. Their kids are learning in the environment that best suits them. And not only that, parents get a say-so in their children's education. Because of my work with Moms for Liberty, I'm able to speak with moms and dads, parents across the country. And I have a friend in Arizona who has told me the parents love that there are options. They love that they have that freedom. They love that they have opportunities for their children, and that the money is able to educate the child in the best way possible for that child. Again, we have seen school choice work. And a lot of times when people talk about it not working, I've seen your organization, Nancy, post some graphics that just aren't there. You cherry pick what you put into those graphics. You leave out states like Alabama and Louisiana, and you don't take into consideration that a lot of these states that you were talking about just recently implemented universal school choice. Give them time to work out the kinks and get their programs going. But what we know, what has been seen, what is true, is that it works. It works for the children, and it gives parents the freedom that they need to raise their children in the way they see fit, much like God intended and much like our Supreme Court has ruled needs to happen. Mississippi is falling behind because we're watching every state around us go to this model. Parents are thrilled with it. They love that they are able to make those decisions. And again, who better to make the decisions for a child than their own parent? Now, you talked about property values. So let's talk about HB2, the House Education Freedom Bill, and what it would have done, because I listened in the committee meeting. I read all of those 500 pages until my eyes were crossing. And what that bill would have done is allow public schools to decide how many children they were going to accept. They had to publish that policy at the beginning of the year and follow it. I don't think that is asking too much from our public schools. They didn't have to accept any student if they didn't want to. If they didn't have any space
It was not required that they ram children in a room so that they can all fit. That is not at all what this bill would have done. That's not what school choice will do. What it will do is allow children that option if there is room and the school will allow them to come there so that they are not held hostage in a failing school. Now, we have some districts that are not failing, but yet there are schools within those districts that are. Those children are literally being held hostage in failing schools with no other option. We can do better.
Thank you. All right. So now we're moving on to a short period where our panelists can ask each other a question. So I'm going to flip a coin, which was generously provided to me at the beginning of the debate, to determine who goes first. Nancy, you've got to go first. So Lindsay, you want to call heads or tails?
Sure.
What do you want?
Yes.
I've got a lot of practice to do. All right.
We take a picture of you like slamming it down your wrist, make it look really slick, all right?
Oh, yeah.
Okay, look good, slam it down. There you go.
All right. It was tails. Is that what you picked? I forgot.
I picked him. I picked heads. I'm sorry.
Heads? All right. Nancy, would you like to go first?
Would I like to go first or second?
Yeah.
I'll go second.
You'll go second? All right. Lindsay, you will have 30 seconds to present a question, and then Nancy will have 3.5 minutes to answer. So please.
Nancy, can you tell us about the private boarding school that you went to in Port Gibson and why you think that private education should be reserved for only the wealthy here in Mississippi? And was that school held to the same testing requirements as others?
Thank you for that question. So I wasn't a boarding student, but I did attend private school. And by the time I got to high school, I knew that I was not getting the quality education I deserved. I was not being prepared at the level that I wanted to be prepared to go to college. And my experience there is one of very many reasons that my husband and I were absolutely determined that our children would be in public schools. And the education that our children received in the public school system was just stellar and was so superior to the education that I received in that private school. I would have given anything to have had the education that my children received. No, it was not held accountable to those schools. It should be. My parents should have had that information. They might have made a different choice had they had that information. One of the things that you mentioned about, you said something about Arizona not going bankrupt. Here's what really happened in Arizona. They have spent almost $1 billion a year on vouchers. And what that meant to the rest of their state budget was that everything else got cut, and including their public schools. Every single year since the universal voucher program passed in Arizona, their public schools per student funding has decreased. They now are at the 2008 level of funding per student for their public schools. Some of their schools are closing because of that. So it simply is not true that when you spend $1 billion on private schools, most of which is going to fund the tuition of children whose parents already had them in private school and who were already paying that tuition themselves, you're creating a tremendous fiscal burden on your state. North Carolina is now up to $850 million. In Arkansas, 95% of the children who got the vouchers in the first year had already been in private school before the voucher legislation passed. You can't spend that kind of money and not have it hurt your budget. That hurts your public education system. It just does. And I'm not sure I'm even understanding what you're saying about HB2, saying that public schools didn't have to accept all children. That, I think you're talking about the public school choice provision where children can leave another school district to go into their district, but public schools still are and always will be mandated to welcome every single child who lives within the school district. That didn't change. It wouldn't have changed in House Bill 2. But House Bill 2 had so many problems that it died a very quick death in the legislature.
Oh, you've got 30 seconds. Sorry, I didn't mean to.
That's-
Okay. All right. So now you'll have an additional 30 seconds to ask your question to Lindsay.
Okay, so the school choice really is about making sure that all students and all parents have a choice. Shouldn't private schools that receive state funding be open to all children?
Again, state funding is tax dollars paid by these parents. And no, we don't want a cookie cutter approach. You are correct. Public schools have to accept children that live within their district. And I was trying to get to the property value point that you mentioned, because the property values are not going to change. The only way that you can be guaranteed to have a spot in your public school is if you live within that district, because according to HB2, they didn't have to accept any child from outside their district. So that's one thing. Again, what we were trying to pass here in Mississippi with HB2 was an ESA, an Education Scholarship Student Savings Account, not a voucher. And as for Arizona, it is right there in black and white on azedu.gov, where they talk about the surplus that they have and how it is false. It is a false narrative that they are going bankrupt or that this has cost their state too much money. Again, I believe our legislators in our House, their Speaker Jason White, looked at all of these things. They took every bit of this into consideration, looked at the states that have passed these school choice measures, and they wrote legislation, they wrote a bill that they dropped this session that would have a phased-in approach. They were only offering 12,500 of these Magnolia Scholarship accounts the first year. Half of those would have been public to public transfers, and the other half of those would have been public to private transfers. So we weren't going in and just giving money to parents who already have children in private schools. That's not what the bill, it's not what was written, that's not what it said. And so I really disagree with the way that you word things and the way that you represent things, because a lot of times it's false. And you have the ears of our teachers. A lot of our teachers are incredibly misinformed about what this legislation would have done. I think my favorite lie is we already have school choice. If you don't like what you've got, you can just up and move. Well, when you're a single widowed mother of 5, one with special needs, working 3 jobs to make ends meet, you can't just up and move. That's not an option. That is not an option for me. And my children don't deserve the best education for them just because I'm not wealthy. Our zip codes shouldn't matter. They should not matter, and neither should race, neither should socioeconomic status, neither does how much money your parents make. Our children deserve the best education possible that fits their specific individual needs.
All right, that's the end of the proper debate period, so let's just give both of our speakers a big applause. So we've now got 20 minutes for you all to pose questions to the panelists. What I'll ask is just that you raise a hand, I'll call on you, and then whoever wants to answer first, if you could repeat the question, or at least your best interpretation of the question loud and clear for the camera, that'll just help us all be able to hear and stay engaged. All right? So, 20 minutes, clock has started. Who wants to go first? Please.
Miss Nancy, Miss Nancy, you keep on talking about that private schools don't have the same accountability as public schools. And I was a child product of both. I went from K all the way up to 8th grade in private schools, and then I switched to public schools. And from my experience, about half the stuff that they taught in my public high school already knew in through private schools. What makes you think that's the opposite for most kids? Like, can you name me like a specific example of that? Because you keep on saying there's been kids, but can you name me an example?
Well, I'm not going to name children. I'm not going to do that. But I would say that you're a very lucky guy, because the research says the opposite. What all these studies have found, I mean, we're talking about studies from Indiana and Wisconsin and Louisiana and Alabama and all these different states that show that when voucher students leave the public schools and go to private schools, and of course, these are averages, okay, they're exceptions, but they suffer what the researchers term persistent learning loss. They went backward. There's also, you can just look at the national test scores and you can see, I mentioned this earlier, that while Mississippi without school choice was rising to the top in the national rankings, our public schools, the states that had adopted school choice, the top 10 states for school choice, every single one of them, including Florida, went backward over the last decade since they had implemented their school choice programs on the very same assessments. And so you were very lucky. You went to a very high, I guess, high-performing private school. And there are some of those in Mississippi, and there are some of those in every state. But when you think about the 200-plus private schools that we have, so many of them are not that caliber. And parents don't have any way of knowing that if they don't see an apples-to-apples comparison. I absolutely agree that parents should have a choice. But again, the question is, what should taxpayers be asked to fund? And taxpayers should also, the schools that receive taxpayer funds, state funds, should be accountable to the people who are paying the bill. And that is all taxpayers, not just the parents in private schools. And so they should be publicly accountable to everybody. I think that is a very conservative viewpoint, that any entity that receives public dollars should be accountable to the public.
Lindsay, do you want to offer any thoughts on that?
Yes, I would love to. So yes, Mississippi has made incredible gains. They like to call it the Mississippi Miracle. We know that conservative Republican education policy works. Under Governor Bill Bryant and with Tate Reeves at the helm, they were destined to make sure that we did better when it comes to education. Now, they passed these new literacy standards, and they also put in a third grade reading gate. Nancy, you did not support that. You said that we're setting these children up for failure, was the quote in the Clarion Ledger by Jerry Mitchell. And I don't understand why anyone would not support, let's make sure that our children are where they need to be before we allow them to move on. Now, you talked about Mississippi not having school choice, but let's look at New Jersey, New York, Connecticut. None of those states have school choice either, yet they are some of the ones that spend the most per pupil across the country, and their reading scores fell after the pandemic 7 points, 9 points, and 11 points respectively. So do you think that might be because they didn't have school choice? Now, we've made incredible gains here in Mississippi. Absolutely we have, but why stop there? We are not where we need to be, and there's more to be done. There's more that we can do to increase and keep moving in the right direction.
Thank you both. Do we have another question? Please, sorry.
A lot's been asked about, or a lot's been talked about public to private transfer. Are you both in favor of public to public? If not, why not?
Well, it depends on how it's written. So the issue that the Parents Campaign had with how that was written in House Bill 2 and how it's been written in all the bills that I've seen is it gives too much weight to, it allows public schools to pick and choose kids just like private schools do. We oppose that. We oppose that for any school, to pick and choose children. We believe, now the House did have a bill that provided a lottery. And then we certainly would prefer that public schools be required to use a lottery to determine which children would move from one to the next. But let me also, what you said about the Parents Campaign and me not supporting the third grade literacy bill, that is false. We endorsed it. It's on our website. It's been on our website since 2013 when that was passed. There are some folks who say that that's not true, but it's there and you can go back.
Lindsay, would you like to respond?
Yeah, well, I absolutely support public to public school transfers. And again, they were the ones who were going to decide if they accepted students or not. They would have to have a clear policy, it would have to be posted to their website prior to the school year starting. So there wouldn't be any picking and choosing. Now, there are lots of reasons that children would need to leave one public school to go to another. Bullying, for example. This is a real problem. This is a real issue. And students that don't have that option to transfer or that are being held hostage because the school district in which they are in will not allow them to leave to go to another school district, one that has even accepted them, they are stuck there. That is not good for those children who are living hell every day, being bullied in a place where they should feel safe. Another reason would be because a student wants to take certain courses that one particular public school does not offer. Now, if they are interested in art or music and another school within the district or within a different district and another public school offers that, why should we hold children back from doing something that is going to help them excel in life?
All right, user, your question?
Yeah, my question is, you guys discussed property values. You guys discussed property values. Now, I live in the Jackson metro area. This has been, the public transfer has been a contentious issue in the metro area. The Madison County, or I think the school board and the superintendent put out a postcard that addressed property values and culture, and that would be affected by a public transfer. And my question is, what do they mean by culture and property values? And don't those echo the segregationist arguments of the 1950s and 60s? Because if you pull them, they're the same exact statements that were made by them that the Madison County School Board is now saying now, and I think I even heard the Pearl superintendent say the same thing. Where does that mean?
So, lots of people talk about school culture. So school culture is different from family culture or any other culture. And every individual school has its own culture. I mean, I think everybody would agree with that. And it's why, for example, when public schools are internally sometimes, for one reason or another, are debating closing a school within the district and moving those children into a different school within the district. And those decisions are so fraught and so contentious. And it does have to do, people want to cheer for their Wildcats or whatever their team is. I mean, there is a culture that is associated with a school. And when children have been in a different setting and come into a school, a lot of times there can be friction there because of that. And I think that is what I didn't write that, and so I hate to put words in someone else's mouth. My understanding that it has to do with the property values piece, though, is entirely different, and that has to do with just the fact that y'all know that this is true, based on your own experience, that your property values are to a very large degree driven by the quality of your school district, because if people have to, as Lindsay said, actively buy a home for their kids to be able to attend school in that district, then that drives up your property values. So if all of a sudden you don't have to live within the district to send your child there, that obviously is going to remove that pressure on your housing market. And so the numbers just tell you that drives down property values just because there's not that pressure on your market. Does that make sense?
Okay, I'm not gonna beat around the bush here, I'm sorry, but when we say things like property values and culture, there's Jackson right there in the middle of Madison County Schools and Rankin County Schools. It's very clear what is meant by that. I think that is wrong, and I think it shouldn't matter what color your skin is. You deserve the opportunity to be educated in the environment that best suits your needs.
Sorry.
Yeah, I have a question. Ms. Beckham, so I want to try to relate this to my own experience in high school. So when I graduated, I'm not anywhere near this old, but when I graduated from a public school here in Mississippi, my history book said that Bill Clinton was the current president of the United States. So that being said, and then also I think about, if I did have the option, if I was given a state voucher to go to a private school, it wouldn't have mattered how much money the state. Thank you, sorry. It wouldn't have mattered how much money the state threw at us. My folks would have been able to drive to school anyway. So it wouldn't have made a difference. I'd still been going to the same school that had 400 and staff with a history book that said Bill Clinton was current president when I graduated. How diverting the money away, I'm not like maybe diverting it away, inevitably taking money out of public schools anywhere, solve the problem of our public schools being so underfunded is definitely the right word, but ill-equipped is a better word. The funding based on MA fully funded formula, which is, like I said, fully funded. We still don't seem to get the resources that we need. So how can a way public schools to get the assets they need in a reasonable fashion, in an updated fashion, in a present fashion, and still, if a parent wants to send someone to a private school with the tax dollars that they paid, how can that balance work? Can that balance work? Is it just going from the public schools, allocate them to private institutions?
Funny you should say that, because where's this accountability it's been giving us? If you have a textbook that clearly is outdated. Now, again, I think I said this at the beginning, in the last 10 years, public schools are educating 60,000 students, have $2 billion more being allocated to the legislature every year. How much money will ever be enough money to educate our children? You know what? One thing we could do, attendance, $250,000. Because I'm in Mississippi, it is one of the, and if they are not doing the job they need to be doing, why on earth are they making that kind of money? Our governor doesn't make that kind of money. I don't even know that our president makes that kind of money. So why on earth are Mississippi superintendents making, when we have classrooms like here underfunded and that need more updated resources? Now, when you take a child, or according to HB2, what was going to happen and allow them to use their money allocated by the state, which is around $7,000, to go to a private school, guess what? That per pupil spending is about $14,000. That extra $7,000, it stayed right there in the school district for a child they're not even servicing anymore. So all in all, public schools wouldn't be educating as many students, yet they would have more money. And on the transportation issue, I think that is a problem, because we do have students that deserve options. And I think if we could get school choice measures through, that would be something that would be looked at in the future.
Sure. I hear you. And those, and I'm not aware of superintendents making are they're very good, not in the school like what you're talking about, or the textbooks. But let me this, people know that there are things that the budget that they are not, that would make a tremendous difference, particularly in our most low wealth districts with some of our neediest children. One of them, for example, is facilities funding. I don't know if y'all know this, but the state provides no funding at all for school facilities. That is left 100% up to the local taxpayers. And we have communities that just cannot, they don't have the tax base to be able to afford to make the repairs and renovations and build the quality facilities that those children deserve. And that's why we have these huge disparities in the quality of facilities from one school district to the next. Research shows us that the quality of your school building makes a huge difference in student achievement. It makes sense. If your heat and air don't work, if your bathrooms are out of order, it's really hard for children to learn well. If rain is pouring through the roof. So a lot of that money that they're talking about devoting to a voucher program, and an ESA is a type of voucher, that money could be much better spent to benefit all children by preparing these facilities and providing quality facilities for all students. It simply doesn't make sense for us to create this system of have and have not schools when we know our public school teachers, as Lindsey has alluded to with the Mississippi Miracle, they know how to move kids forward. What has happened in our public schools over the last couple of decades is a miracle. I mean, it's not really a miracle. It's hard work. It's hard work. And it's a result of public school teachers, not school choice.
We've got time for one, maybe two overfast questions. I saw it in the very back first. I'm so sorry.
Thank you. Ms. Loome, if you were able to pick, which special needs student would you kick out of the ESA program if you got your way of no public dollars to private schools?
I'm not in favor of kicking anybody out of anywhere. I'm in favor of using public funds for publicly accountable public, that's what I'm in favor of. But I think that all children deserve to be well served. And where we have challenges, and we do have challenges, the obligation of the state is to fix that issue for all the children, not just say to some, leave if you can. That is not a solution. That is creating more problems. The obligation of the state is to provide quality education for every single child. And I think we know how to do that.
Well, I think you made my point for me, just then, if a child is in a situation that's not good for them, you can't just say, leave if you can. That's exactly what I'm talking about here. There are students who are stuck. They can't leave, they don't have that option. This would provide them that option. And by the way, to your question, I would not remove the ESA from any of our special needs children because they are the ones who desperately need it the most. And I was so excited last year, thankfully under our speaker, Jason White's leadership, that we were able to fund the ESA waitlist.
We do have time for another question, please.
Teachers and administrators are overwhelmingly opposed to school choice. So why do teachers get school choice?
Do you mean because their students can go with them
If you're in
to?
a district and you do not want your child to go to school there, you just get a job at the better district and you get to take your kids. So as far as I'm concerned, it shouldn't matter where your parent works, where you get to go to school. If my child can't go to the better school because I work at Home Depot, then why can a teacher pick the school that they want to go to and then their kids can go there?
And like, I actually wasn't doing this work when that passed a really, really long time ago. It's been in place for a really long time. But my guess is that the thought was twofold, maybe, or that, but that it is a benefit to work, it's one of the benefits that's provided to the teachers, that they can have their children in the same school where they are, which makes it easier at the end of the day. When the child gets out of school, they can go to their mother's classroom, their father's classroom, and be there with them instead of be to after-school program or something like that. So I think it was to provide a benefit to teachers, maybe address the teacher shortage like we have now. Our public school teachers give so much. They deserve some benefits for what they do, and they deserve a pay raise. Y'all call your legislators and tell them to pass a good pay raise for these teachers. They are just doing incredible work. It's very hard, very difficult work. They're very underpaid. And so I don't have any qualms with them. If it makes life easier for them to have their kids with them at the end of the day, I say, amen.
I understand that being a benefit for our public school teachers. They do work hard, they are underpaid. And we have some public school teachers that are like family to my family now, that have taught my children. But there are lots of people that work really hard who would like to have that same option, that their kids get to go to school closer to where they work because it's convenient. I believe that's the reason why this was passed many, many years ago, like you said, that it's convenient for our teachers. But other people work hard too, and why should we hold that convenience from them?
Everybody, it's been a great time. Let's give a big hand. Quickly, I just want to thank Nancy Loome of the Parents Campaign and Lindsey Beckham of Moms for Liberty for being here. I want to thank Lawson Campbell and the Young Americans for Liberty for putting the event on. And I hope you've had a great time. I think maybe some other people have things to say about thanking you and giving your food. So I'll listen to you for moderator.
And like I said, these two women are very brave to come out here and have this debate. Actually, right before, about a week ago, I actually asked Ms. Beckham if she'd ever met Ms. Loome, had a face-to-face conversation with her before. And she told me no. So it's very awesome to connect these two people and really foster that nice civil dialogue. We really want to see more of in our society. Mr. Nathan Moore, the American Prosperity, has generously provided us with Chick-fil-A over there in the corner. And all of y'all are very excited for that. I know I am. Last but not least, we go through here. We've got our social media page. If you have a group me and Instagram, and also we now accept donations through Give, Send, Go. Other thing is, there's a couple more upcoming events. April 7th, we'll in between a couple of speakers, kind of waiting to hear back on some finalization of plans. After that, YouTuber Monster Z. Some of you might be familiar with, some might be not. He's a big flip commentary YouTuber. He's going to be coming to our school April 21st. It's going to be a great time, a good event. With that, we're going to go ahead and close this up and let y'all go eat. Thank you all for out here on this somewhat rainy day and supporting us, supporting this free discourse here. Thank you all.
Yeah, we have the same,
Thank you.
we have the same amount of